Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Storyriem. I'm so happy you're here with me today. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your shoulders relax, clear your mind, and let the story carry you back through time to a land of endless deserts, towering stone walls, gleaming swords, deep faith, and one unforgettable young king. Now, imagine yourself standing on a quiet hill. Below you stretches a city built from golden stone, glowing beneath the warm afternoon sun. Ancient walls surround it, graceful domes rise above its rooftops, and the air is filled with the scent of dust, warm earth, and distant spices. This is Jerusalem, one of the most important cities in human history, a place that Christians, Muslims, and Jews have all considered sacred for centuries. The year is 1174. Inside the royal palace, a 13-year-old boy is about to receive a crown. But there is something everyone in that palace already knows, something no one dares to say aloud. The boy is dying. A terrible disease is slowly taking over his body, and there is no cure. He will never grow into an old man. He will never have children. Year after year, he will watch his own body grow weaker little by little. Most people would lose hope. Most people would surrender to fear. But not this boy. Against every expectation, he would become one of the most extraordinary kings the world has ever known. His name was Baldwin, and this is his story. Stay with me, because this is more than the story of a king. It is the story of a young boy who knew his time was limited, yet chose to fight for his people every single day. Before we meet Baldwin, we need to understand the world he was born into, a world filled with danger, conflict, and impossible choices. Our story begins nearly a century earlier. In the year 1095, the Pope, the head of the Christian Church in Europe, called upon Christians across the continent to march to the Holy Land. The Holy Land, centered around Jerusalem, was sacred to Christians, Muslims, and Jews alike. At that time, it was ruled by Muslim leaders, and the Pope urged Christians to reclaim it. His words inspired thousands of people. Knights, soldiers, farmers, and priests left behind their homes and families, crossing mountains, rivers, and scorching deserts in a journey that lasted for months. Many never survived the journey. But in the year 1099, the Crusaders finally reached Jerusalem. After a fierce and bloody battle, they captured the city and established a new Christian kingdom known as the Kingdom of Jerusalem. It was a small kingdom surrounded on every side by powerful enemies. Life there was never peaceful. Every year brought new threats. Every victory had to be defended, and every mistake could lead to disaster. Survival demanded constant courage, constant vigilance, and constant sacrifice. This was the world Baldwin inherited. Baldwin was born around the year 1161, inside the royal palace of Jerusalem. His father was King Almaric I. Unlike most children, Baldwin grew up surrounded by armored knights, royal advisors, priests, and soldiers preparing for war. Even as a young boy, he stood out. He was intelligent, curious, and eager to learn. He loved riding horses, playing with the other noble children, and asking thoughtful questions about the world around him. His greatest teacher was William of Tyre, one of the finest scholars of the Middle Ages. William taught the young prince history, politics, religion, and the responsibilities of ruling a kingdom. But one ordinary afternoon, he noticed something that would change Baldwin's life forever. The boys were playing together in the palace courtyard. They laughed as they wrestled, chased one another, and playfully shoved each other across the stone floor. Then William saw something strange. Whenever the other boys were scratched or pinched, they cried out in pain. But Baldwin did not. The boys grabbed his right arm. They scratched his skin. They squeezed his hand as hard as they could. Still, he showed no reaction. William called the prince over and gently took his hand. He pressed his fingers into Baldwin's skin and then pushed his fingernails into the boy's arm. Still nothing. Baldwin simply looked back at his teacher with calm, curious eyes, completely unaware that anything was wrong. In that instant, William's heart sank. He had studied the ancient medical texts and recognized the signs immediately. Baldwin had leprosy. Leprosy attacks the body's nerves. At first, it steals the ability to feel pain. Then the skin begins to change. The muscles weaken. The hands and feet slowly lose their shape. The face becomes swollen. And in many cases, the disease eventually takes a person's sight. Today, leprosy can be treated. But in the 12th century, there was no medicine, no cure, and no hope. Those who suffered from it could only watch as the disease slowly took control of their bodies. And this child was destined to become king. Then, in the year 1174, tragedy struck. King Amaric died suddenly after a severe fever, and the kingdom desperately needed a new ruler. Everyone knew about Baldwin's illness. Everyone understood what the future would bring. Yet the nobles of Jerusalem made an extraordinary decision. They crowned him king. Imagine that moment. A boy only 13 years old, already carrying a disease that would one day destroy his body, suddenly found himself responsible for defending one of the most dangerous kingdoms on earth. Think about that for a moment. You are only 13 years old. You cannot feel your own hand. You know your body will slowly betray you. You know there is no cure. And yet, you must wear a crown. You must lead armies. You must make decisions that will determine the fate of thousands of lives. You must protect your people from enemies waiting just beyond your borders. Most people would have surrendered to fear. Baldwin never did. From the very first day of his reign, he devoted himself completely to the work of being king. He studied maps late into the night. He listened carefully to experienced advisors. He learned every road, every fortress, every village, and every weakness along his kingdom's borders. Many of the older knights looked at this young, sick king with doubt. They saw only a fragile teenager. But Baldwin possessed something far greater than physical strength. He had a brilliant mind. He understood people. He understood leadership. He understood war. And those qualities would soon be tested in ways no one could have imagined. Many of the older knights looked at Baldwin with doubt. All they could see was a sick teenager wearing a crown that seemed far too heavy for him. They wondered how a boy whose body was already beginning to fail could possibly defend a kingdom surrounded by enemies. But they were looking at the wrong thing. They saw weakness. They failed to see the strength hidden beneath it. Baldwin possessed something that no teacher could ever give him. He had a brilliant mind, a calm heart, and an instinct for leadership far beyond his years. He understood people. He understood strategy. He understood war. And above all, he possessed something incredibly rare. He simply wasn't afraid. That courage would soon be tested, because beyond the borders of Jerusalem, another extraordinary leader was rising to power. His name was Saladin. History remembers Saladin as one of the greatest military commanders the world has ever known. He ruled Egypt and Syria, creating a powerful empire that surrounded the tiny kingdom of Jerusalem on almost every side. He was intelligent, disciplined, patient, and when necessary, utterly ruthless. His dream was clear. He wanted to unite the Muslim world and reclaim Jerusalem. He had everything a great commander could ask for: a vast army, experienced generals, abundant resources, and years of military success. Standing against him was a teenage king whose own body was slowly turning against him. In the year 1177, the moment everyone feared finally arrived. Saladin gathered an enormous army. Historians estimate that nearly 26,000 soldiers marched toward Jerusalem, expecting a swift and decisive victory. Baldwin was only 16 years old. Most of his forces were stationed across the kingdom, guarding distant castles and important roads. With him were only a few hundred knights. The odds were impossible. Almost any ruler would have stayed safely behind Jerusalem's walls, hoping the city could survive a long siege. But Baldwin chose a different path. Instead of waiting for the enemy to come to him, he rode out to meet Saladin in the open countryside. Picture the scene. A 16-year-old king, already showing first signs of leprosy, rides at the front of a tiny army. Behind him are exhausted knights who know they are hopelessly outnumbered. Every sensible calculation says they are riding toward defeat. Eventually, they found Saladin's army near a place called Montgisard. Baldwin looked across the wide plain at the sea of enemy soldiers stretching before him. Then he turned toward his own men. There were only a handful of them. For a brief moment, everything fell silent. Then Baldwin gave a single command: charge. The knights lowered their lances and thundered straight toward the heart of Saladin's army. It seemed almost unbelievable. Perhaps it was incredible courage. Perhaps it was pure desperation. Whatever it was, it changed history. Saladin's army had become overconfident. Believing victory was certain, many of his soldiers had spread out and relaxed their formation. The last thing they expected was a direct attack from such a small force. The charge struck like a bolt of lightning. The disciplined ranks collapsed. Confusion spread from one end of the battlefield to the other. Within moments, what had looked like an unstoppable army dissolved into panic. Soldiers fled in every direction, struggling to understand what had happened. Against every expectation, Baldwin's tiny force won one of the most astonishing victories of Crusades. The battlefield was left covered with fallen warriors. Saladin's mighty army had been shattered. Saladin himself escaped only by the narrowest of margins, fleeing across the desert on the back of a camel, with only a handful of loyal guard beside him. Military historians still remember the Battle of Montgisard as one of history's greatest upsets. A 16-year-old king suffering from leprosy had defeated the most powerful commander in the Middle East. When Baldwin returned to Jerusalem, his body was already aching. The disease had not disappeared. It continued its slow, silent work inside him. But for one glorious day, none of that mattered. On that day, he was simply the king who had saved his people. News of the victory spread across Europe and the Middle East. For a brief moment, Baldwin became a legend. But disease does not care about glory. It does not pause for heroes. After Montgisard, the leprosy advanced steadily. Not suddenly, not dramatically, slowly, quietly, like water slowly filling a room. Year after year, it stole another piece of him. First, he lost all feeling in both arms. Then his hands became too weak and twisted to hold a sword or even control the reins of his horse. Soon his legs weakened until standing without help became impossible. Before long, he could no longer walk at all. The disease continued its cruel work. His face began to swell. His skin thickened. The features people once recognized slowly disappeared beneath the illness. Eventually, Baldwin covered his face, not because he was ashamed, but because he did not want others to witness what the disease was doing to him. Then, one day, darkness came. He lost his sight. Imagine carrying the responsibility of an entire kingdom while never seeing another sunrise. Imagine never seeing the faces of your family, your friends, or the soldiers who would fight and die for you. Imagine reading no letters, studying no maps, and never watching the horizon for an approaching enemy. Your body no longer obeys you. The world around you disappears into darkness. Most people would have surrendered. Baldwin refused. When he could no longer ride a horse, his soldiers carried him on a wooden stretcher into battle. When he could no longer lift a sword, he led with his voice. When he could no longer see the battlefield, he relied on his mind. He listened carefully. He questioned every messenger. He studied every report. He remembered every detail. If Saladin moved an army, Baldwin knew where it was heading. If a distant fortress called for help, Baldwin answered. His decisions kept the kingdom of Jerusalem alive years longer than anyone believed possible. His own commanders were amazed. Here was a king who could not stand, could not see, and eventually could not even feed himself. Yet no one in the room could match the speed or clarity of his thinking. As if fighting disease and foreign enemies were not enough, Baldwin also faced danger from within his own court. Not everyone around him was loyal. Some were ambitious. Some were selfish. Some cared more about power than the survival of the kingdom. Among them was Guy de Lusignan, the husband of Baldwin's sister, Sibylla. Guy desperately wanted the crown. He was bold and confident, but he lacked Baldwin's wisdom. He made reckless decisions and underestimated the dangers surrounding Jerusalem. Baldwin recognized the threat immediately. He believed with complete certainty that if Guy ever became king, the kingdom would not survive. So even as his own body continued to fail, Baldwin fought another battle, this one inside his own palace. He removed Guy from positions of power. He appointed more capable commanders. He defended his kingdom not only from invading armies, but also from poor leadership. Every day demanded strength. Every decision came through pain. Yet Baldwin never abandoned his duty. He wore the crown not for glory, but because he believed his people needed him. He knew that the day he let go, everything he had fought to protect might disappear. Perhaps the most remarkable part of this story is the relationship between Baldwin and his greatest enemy. The Middle Ages were an age of brutal wars. Mercy was uncommon. Hatred was expected. Yet between Baldwin and Saladin, there existed something unusual: respect. Saladin never mocked Baldwin's illness. He never treated the young king's disease as a sign of weakness. Instead, he recognized Baldwin for what he truly was, a courageous ruler carrying an impossible burden. And Baldwin, in return, respected Saladin as an honorable and formidable opponent. They stood on opposite sides of history, fighting for the same holy city. Yet each understood the weight the other carried. Two remarkable leaders, two different worlds, one shared understanding of duty. In the spring of 1185, Baldwin IV, king of Jerusalem, died. He was only 24 years old. He had ruled for 11 unforgettable years. 11 years marked by pain. 11 years defined by war. 11 years spent holding together a kingdom that seemed ready to fall apart at any moment. By the end of his life, he could no longer move. He could no longer see. He could barely speak. His body had been almost completely destroyed by disease. By the end of his life, Baldwin's body had been almost completely destroyed by leprosy. Historians tell us that the disease had taken nearly everything from him. He could no longer walk. He could no longer see. Even speaking had become a struggle. And yet, those who stood beside him in his final days remembered something extraordinary. His body had grown weak, but his mind never did. Until his very last breath, Baldwin remained clear, thoughtful, and fully aware of the kingdom he loved. When he died in the spring of 1185, Jerusalem lost far more than a king. It lost the man who had been holding the entire kingdom together. For years, Baldwin had stood like a wall between his people and disaster. But once that wall was gone, everything began to change. The cracks appeared almost immediately. Just 2 years later, the very future Baldwin had feared became reality. Guy de Lusignan, the man Baldwin had tried so hard to keep away from the throne, became king. His poor decisions led to disaster. In the year 1187, Saladin defeated the Crusader army and captured Jerusalem. The city Baldwin had spent his entire life protecting was finally lost. Everything he had sacrificed for, everything he had endured, everything he had fought to preserve, seemed to vanish. But one thing survived: his story. Nearly 1,000 years later, people around the world still remember Baldwin IV, the Leper King of Jerusalem, not because he lived a long life, not because he built a great empire, not because he was the richest or the most powerful ruler of his age. People remember him because he chose courage over fear. He knew he was dying. He knew every year would be harder than the one before. Yet he never stopped leading. He never stopped protecting his people. He never stopped fighting. Not for glory, not for wealth, not for his own name. He fought because others depended on him. And giving up was never a choice he was willing to make. And so, my friends, our journey with Baldwin gently comes to an end. He was never the strongest man on the battlefield. He was never the healthiest. By the end of his life, he could not even hold the sword he had once carried into battle. But there was one thing no illness could ever touch: his courage, his sense of duty, his determination to keep moving forward, even when every step came with pain. That is why his story still matters today. Life has a way of placing impossible challenges in front of us. Sometimes it is illness. Sometimes it is failure. Sometimes it is fear, loneliness, or a dream that feels just out of reach. There are moments when we all feel like giving up. Baldwin's life reminds us that true strength is not measured by muscles or perfect health. It is measured by the choices we make when life becomes difficult. The choice to stand up one more time. The choice to keep trying after another failure. The choice to move forward, even when the road ahead seems impossibly long. And maybe that is why you are here today. You are learning English. Some days, the words come easily. Other days, every sentence feels difficult. The grammar feels confusing. Your confidence disappears, and you begin to wonder whether you will ever become fluent. But look at yourself. You are still here. You are still listening. You are still learning. And that means you are still moving forward. That is exactly the kind of determination Baldwin would have admired. So don't stop. Keep learning. Keep improving. Keep believing in yourself. A small light can shine brightly, even in the darkest night. And sometimes that is more than enough to change everything. Thank you so much for spending this time with me here on Storyriem. Now I'd love to hear from you. Which moment in Baldwin's incredible journey touched your heart the most? Was it the young prince who couldn't feel pain, the fearless charge at the Battle of Montgisard, or the blind king, carried into battle on a stretcher, who refused to abandon his people? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I always enjoy reading what you think. And if you love discovering history through powerful stories like this one, there are many more waiting for you here. Until we meet again, take good care of yourself and never stop learning.